Whispers in the fog. They say the valley has no name on any map, that it was erased, not forgotten, but removed, so travelers would never stumble upon it again. Those who live near the border call it the Hollow Parish or the Greyfold, but the true locals don't call it anything at all. They simply nod toward the hills and say, "Don't go there after dark," because when the mist rises from the marshes, the valley wakes up, the trees creak like doors, the river hums, and sometimes, if you listen long enough, the fog itself begins to speak. No one remembers when the stories began, the woman by the river, the house with watching windows, the man with a lantern, but every generation tells them again, in their own way. Not because they like being frightened, but because they must. It's said that if the stories ever stop being told, the fog will come for new ones to fill the silence. A stranger once came through Dunlow. He stayed one night at the tavern, notebook in hand, asking questions the villagers refused to answer. They told him there were some things better left buried, but he only smiled and said, "I collect whispers." He left before dawn. The innkeeper found his room empty, his bed unslept in. On the table lay a single book, the pages damp with mist. Its title read, "Whispers in the Fog," and inside were 8 stories, written in 8 different hands. No one knows where the book is now. But sometimes, when the fog drifts down from the hills, the villagers say they can hear the sound of pages turning out there in the dark. Chapter 1. The Shadow Woman. No one in Dunlow remembers the first time the fog stayed longer than a morning. Some say it came after the war. Others claim it has always been there, lingering like breath on glass. What they all agree on is this: when the wind turns cold and the moon sits high, you don't walk near the river. That's where she waits. Elias Mare arrived at the edge of Dunlow in late autumn, leading a mule and pulling a forge cart that creaked like old bones. He was a blacksmith by trade, a wanderer by necessity. The harvest was over, the nights were long, and the villagers poor and quiet welcomed him with the cautious warmth they gave all strangers. He rented the old shed near the chapel and lit his furnace the next morning. By evening, he'd already heard the story. "The Shadow Woman," said the innkeeper, wiping her hands on her apron. "Don't walk past the river bend after dark. Don't whistle when the fog rolls in. Don't look too long if you see a woman dressed in black." Elias laughed. "I've met plenty of women in black. Most of them were widows, not ghosts." She didn't smile. "You'll hear her before you see her," the innkeeper said, whispering your name like she's tasting it. For a week, Elias worked the forge and ignored the warnings. He made nails, mended horseshoes, and tried not to notice the villagers' habit of looking over their shoulders. The fog came earlier each night, swallowing the paths and softening every sound. Then on the 7th night, he saw her. She stood by the riverbank where the reeds bent low, her shape almost lost in the mist. Her dress was old-fashioned, black as soot. Her hair clung to her shoulders as though she'd just stepped from the water. When Elias called out, she turned, but the moonlight showed no face, only the shimmer of moving air where eyes should be. He blinked and she was gone. The next morning he told no one, but his hammer struck wrong all day, and the metal sang sharp, discordant notes. He dreamed that night of the woman brushing her hand along his jaw, leaving frost behind. In the dream, she whispered something too soft to hear, but he woke with her voice echoing in his chest. By the 3rd encounter, Elias had stopped pretending she wasn't real. The fog grew thicker, the river slower. He began carving strange symbols on his forged circles within circles, marks he didn't remember learning. The villagers noticed. They stopped bringing him work. Children crossed the street when they passed his door. He didn't blame them. He no longer trusted his reflection. Each night he thought he saw another figure in the mist, standing beside her, a tall shadow with the outline of a forged hammer slung across its shoulder. The preacher had vanished 2 winters earlier, the bard the year before that. Their names were carved on the stone by the chapel, glistening each dawn with dew. Elias began to wonder if the stone wrote itself. On the last night, the fog was so thick the lamps barely burned. He left his forge and walked to the river with a lantern in hand. The air was cold enough to bite. He thought of leaving, of packing the mule and heading west, but the whisper came his name, spoken from both sides of the mist. Elias? She stepped forward, and the water followed her feet. Her eyes, if they were eyes, were endless hollows that shimmered like black glass. He felt her gaze pull at him, gentle but relentless. The lantern dimmed. "What do you want?" he asked. "To be remembered," she breathed. He reached out and her hand met his. For a moment he felt warmth, then the lantern went out. At dawn, the villagers found the forge cold, the mule tied and restless. No one saw Elias again. But by the chapel, below the other names, a fresh carving gleamed in the morning dew. Elias Murray. No one claimed to have made it, but everyone avoided looking too long. The innkeeper swore she heard hammering in the fog that night, faint and steady, as if someone were still at work down by the river. And when the wind turned, it carried a whisper half a name, half a sigh sliding through the village like smoke. So when he passed through Dunlow, stranger, take care. If a woman in the mist calls you to stare, don't follow. Don't speak. Don't even dream her name, because once she looks at you, you'll never leave this place the same. Chapter 2, House on the Right. Every town has that house. In Dunlow, it sits at the end of the narrow lane where the cobblestones turn to dirt and the street lamps flicker in the rain. The locals call it the house on the right, never the Varnum house anymore, though that's who built it. They say the husband, Thomas Varnum, was a fine craftsman and his wife, Ellen, a woman of music and laughter. Their home was once the brightest on the lane, painted cream with a yellow door. But 50 years have passed since a candle burned in its windows. The door is gray now. The roof slouches like an old man's shoulders. And when the fog rolls in, the second-floor curtains move on their own. It was late October when 3 teenagers, Mara, Colin, and June, decided to test the story. The schoolmaster's warnings, the whispers in the inn, even the carved names by the chapel had become a dare in their mouths, the kind of fear that tastes like sugar when you're young. "Just touch the porch," Colin said. "That's all?" Mara hesitated. "They say people hear voices in there." June grinned. "Then we'll talk back." They waited until the moon hid behind the clouds, then biked down the lane. The fog was already thick, swallowing the sound of their wheels. When they reached the end, the house seemed taller than it should have been, the windows like blind eyes, the yellow door faintly ajar. Inside, the air was cold or wet, like the breath of something sleeping. Dust lay on everything, yet no cobwebs clung to the corners, as if the house kept itself clean. In the parlor, they found a teacup still half full, the liquid black and glistening, though the house had been empty for decades. On the mantel sat a small framed portrait of a woman in a lace collar. Her smile was soft, but her eyes had faded to nothing, just pale circles in the photograph. "She's pretty," June said. "Think that's Ellen?" Mara frowned. "She's looking right at me." They crept upstairs, their flashlight beams jittering across peeling wallpaper. The air grew heavy. Each step groaned under their weight, yet when they stopped to listen, another footstep came from the floor above. "There's no third story," Colin whispered. But the sound came again, slow, deliberate, right above their heads. They found the attic door halfway open. Something shifted inside, just out of sight. The beam of the flashlight caught the edge of a mirror and leaned against the far wall, tall and cracked in the middle. For a moment, they saw themselves 3 pale faces in the dark. Then a 4th face blinked in the glass. A woman's, gray-skinned, with hollow eyes and a mouth too wide to be kind. The mirror fell forward and shattered. The house exhaled. They ran. Down the stairs, across the hall. But the front door had shut itself, the knob frozen tight. The teacup from the parlor was gone. In its place lay a ring of water on the mantel and the faint sound of humming 3 notes, the start of an old lullaby. Colin turned the handle again. Harder. The door opened. He stumbled into the fog. June and Mara followed. But when they looked back, the house on the right seemed different. The windows were lit, warm and golden, and in one of them, a woman waved. By morning, Colin's bicycle was found in the ditch. No one saw him again. Mara and June tried to tell their story. But their memories disagreed. One swore the woman smiled. The other swore she had no face at all. The constable nailed the door shut. The fog returned the next night and swallowed the nails. Years later, children still whisper the same warning when they ride down the lane. Don't go knocking on the house on the right. The curtains move though no one's inside. And if a voice calls your name, don't answer. It already knows you're there. If you visit Dunlow and see a house glowing faintly through the fog, don't mistake it for shelter. It remembers faces. It waits for footsteps that sound like yours. Chapter 3. The Lantern Man. They say you can see him where the road gives up. Beyond the bridge at Black Hollow Creek, where the ground softens and the trees lean close enough to touch, there's a light that moves when the wind is still. Not a torch, not a traveler's lamp. A lantern, swinging slow, steady as a heartbeat, belonging to a man who no longer remembers what he's looking for. The villagers call him the Lantern Man. Some say he's a ghost. Others say he's a warning. But the oldest among them whisper that he was once a husband searching for his lost wife, and that the fog kept him when she would not. It was Jonah Blythe who gave the legend back its name. Jonah had been a hunter before the fog came to stay. He was a man of wood smoke and silence, with hands that smelled of pine resin and old iron. His wife, Margaret, died in the spring thaw fever that took her in 2 nights. He buried her himself on the hill overlooking the valley, marking the grave with her wedding scarf tied to a willow branch. But Jonah never could leave well enough alone. Every evening when the mist rose from the creek, he swore he saw a light moving through the pines. Not fireflies too bright, too patient. Always the same height off the ground, always retreating when he followed. He told the preacher he thought it was her still walking home. The preacher told him to pray. Instead, Jonah packed his rifle and his lamp. The first night he followed it, he walked until the stars went wrong. The woods grew stranger the deeper he went. Trees nodded in ways that hurt the eyes, roots crossing the path like hands reaching up from below. He found no birds, no insects. Only the sound of water dripping where there was no rain. At the bottom of a small clearing stood a man with a lantern. Jonah called out, thinking him another hunter. The man didn't answer, only turned slightly, the dim flame outlining his jaw too long, too pale. The light flickered, and Jonah thought, he's wearing my coat. The same tear at the cuff, the same patch by the pocket. When the figure lifted its head, Jonah saw his own eyes reflected in the glass. Then the lantern went dark. 3 days later, they found his rifle by the creek, rusted as if it had lain there for years. The willow branch by his wife's grave was gone. And at night, when the fog rolled over Dunlow, a new light appeared in the forest low, golden, swinging. Children sometimes follow it, thinking it's someone calling them home. None ever walk far before they turn back, hearts pounding, breath frosting in the air. Because if you linger long enough, you hear footsteps just behind you keeping pace. Some claim the Lantern Man's whisper sounds like someone they loved saying, "This way." An old woman named May lived alone near the edge of the wood. One night, she went to fetch water from her well and saw the light drifting between the pines. It stopped when she did, waiting. She swore she saw a figure holding the lantern face gray, eyes glowing like embers in ash. He raised a hand to her, palm out. May said she felt her body go numb, as if she were sinking through ice. She dropped her bucket and ran. When she reached her cottage, she realized her shadow hadn't followed her. For the rest of her life, she cast none. Now, on nights when the moon hides, Dunlow keeps its shutters closed. The fog thickens near the creek, and those who must travel bring no light at all. Because the Lantern Man doesn't guide the lost, he collects them. They say every name whispered by the fog is another voice he led astray, another flame added to his lamp. And if you see a glow where no path lies, turn your back, keep walking. Don't call out, because the Lantern Man doesn't chase you. He waits for you to chase him. Chapter 4. The Willows curse past the old stone barn. Where the path turns to mud and the air grows heavy, there stands a willow that never dies. Its branches hang low enough to brush your shoulders if you re foolish enough to pass beneath them. The villagers say it weeps even when the sky is clear, thick droplets like tears running from its gray bark. No one cuts it. No one burns its wood. They say it remembers pain. The story began with Ruth Avery, a widow who refused to leave the edge of the valley after her husband died. She lived alone in the cottage beyond the barn, her days spent mending clothes and feeding crows that gathered on her roof. The villagers pitied her until she started talking to the tree. At first, she said the wind made strange shapes in the willow's leaves. Then she said it whispered. Then she said it answered. One night, Ruth told her neighbor, old Tom, that the willow had promised her something. "It knows where he is," she said. "It can give him back if I listen." Tom crossed himself and begged her not to go back out there, but Ruth only smiled, soft and tired. "You don't understand," she said. It spoke with his voice. That was the last night she slept in her bed. She took to sitting beneath the willow until dawn, her shawl pulled tight, eyes half closed as if in prayer. The villagers watched from afar. They swore the tree leaned lower each morning, its branches curling around her like arms. When they called her name, she didn't answer. Once, a child threw a stone toward the roots, and the sound it made wasn't a rock hitting dirt, but something wet. After 3 weeks, Ruth's cottage was found empty. Her chair still rocked before the fire. But where the willow stood, a new shape had appeared in the trunk, faint but clear, a face, with closed eyes and a mouth half open as if singing. The tree had grown taller overnight. People tried to chop it down. The first man who swung his axe found the blade stuck fast, the wood bleeding a dark sap that smelled like rust and lily. His arm turned cold to the shoulder before he made it home. The next morning he was gone, and his axe was found at the willow's roots, the handle wrapped in vines like fingers. They say the curse began there, or maybe it was only the curse remembering itself, for the willow had been planted long ago on the same hill where the villagers once hanged a woman accused of witchcraft. Some say it grew from the rope that took her life, watered by her last breath. Her name is lost or forbidden, but her grief feeds the tree still. Every tear it sheds, every whisper through its leaves, is another voice calling back to her. Sometimes when the fog comes heavy, people hear singing near the barn. A woman's voice, soft and low, humming a tune that sounds almost kind. But if you follow the sound, it never stays in one place until you reach the willow. There it stops. And if you look too long into the bark, you'll see your own face staring back, eyes half shut, mouth starting to open. So if you walk the road past the stone gray barn, keep your head down. If you feel leaves brush your shoulder, don't stop. And whatever you do, don't fall asleep beneath the willow, because the tree doesn't dream, it remembers. And once it remembers you, it never lets go. Chapter 5 Harvest Dolls. Every autumn, when the wheat turned gold and the crows grew bold, the people of Dunlow once hung their harvest dolls. They were crude little figures, burlap skin, straw hair, button eyes, tied with red thread and hung on fence posts or at the edges of fields. The elders said they were guardians, each one stitched with a prayer to keep the rot away and the dead beneath the earth. But as the years passed and the old voices died, the new folk laughed. Just country superstition, they said. And so one year they didn't hang the dolls at all. That was the year the fields stopped growing right. It began small, a patch of wheat that rotted overnight, a strange pattern in the soil that no one could explain. Then the animals grew restless. The cows refused to graze near the scarecrow post. Chickens pecked their own feathers. And at night, the fog came rolling down from Black Hollow earlier than it ever had before, carrying the faint sound of thread pulling through cloth. Tommy Baines, a farmhand with more pride than patience, mocked it all. He'd been drinking in the tavern when the old widow Lark warned him, "You hang those dolls, boy." The harvest won't forgive a year forgotten. Tommy just laughed. If the fields want dolls, they can make their own. That night, when he stumbled home, he found one waiting, sitting on his windowsill, facing the bed. It wasn't one of the old ones. The stitching was too new, too fine. Its left button was carved wood, the right was glass, and sewn into its chest, beneath the twine, was a small curl of brown hair, Tommy's hair. He threw it into the fire. It didn't burn, The burlap smoked but never turned to ash. The button eyes only gleamed brighter. By morning, Tommy was gone. His bed was full of straw and red thread. No one saw him again, but that evening, a new doll appeared, hung on the fence post by the road, head tilted, one glass eye catching the sunset. The village panicked. They began sewing again, desperately, clumsily, too late. For every doll they made, 2 more appeared that no one claimed. The dolls began turning up in doorways, on porches, nailed to barn doors, some with names stitched into their hems, some humming faintly when the wind passed through them. Old widow Lark finally told the truth. The first dolls were never for the crops, she said. They were for her. They kept the dead still and the soil safe. Every doll was an offering, a promise we'd remember what we did. What we did, the preacher asked. But she only crossed herself and said, "We buried her here, beneath the corn." That winter, the frost came early. The fields went gray, the earth cracked, and one by one the dolls vanished. When spring returned, the crops grew again, but the first harvest revealed something new in the wheat. Rows of shapes standing upright, straw-haired and still, each with faces that looked too human. Their eyes were made of glass and wood. Their mouths were stitched shut with red thread. And when the wind moved through the valley, they whispered, soft and low, the same words the elders once prayed. Keep her sleeping. Keep her bound. Now, every harvest, Dunlow hangs the dolls again. No one forgets. Not anymore. Because the dolls aren't just for the dead. They're for the living who might take the dead's place. Chapter 6, Mist at Black Hollow. They called it Black Hollow because no light ever stayed there. The valley dipped low between the hills like a scar that never healed. In daylight, it looked harmless, a shallow basin tangled with reeds and moss. But when the fog came down, the hollow filled like a cup, and those who stepped inside said the world forgot them. For years, the villagers kept away. But curiosity has sharp teeth, and some people can't leave silence alone. That's why Dr. Mara Lorne came to Dunlow. She wasn't from the valley. She came from the city, with a grant, a camera, and a mouth full of skepticism. The locals told her stories of ghosts and curses, but she was a scientist. To her, the fog was just vapor and fear. She rented a small room above the tavern and carried her equipment down to the hollow the next morning. She planned to record barometric data and magnetic fluctuations. Instead, she recorded whispers. Her first entry, dated October 6th, read, "There's something unusual here. The instruments register static, but only when I speak. The air feels thick, like sound has weight." Her second entry, October 8th, "The compass spins. No north, no south, just circles. The locals call it a wound." They might not be wrong. By October 10th, she stopped labeling the tapes. Her voice changed, softer, slower, as if something else were speaking through her. "The fog listens," she said. "When I breathe, it breathes back." The last villager to see her was young Aben Lark, Widow Lark's grandson. He watched her walk into the mist at dusk, the strap of her recorder hanging from her shoulder. She waved once, smiling. He swore she looked like she knew where she was going. She never came out again. 2 weeks later, her equipment was found at the hollow's edge, every wire tangled with fine white thread. The recorder still worked, though no one could explain how. The final minute played back a single phrase in her voice, repeated 3 times, each quieter than the last. "I found her name." Then, a sound like wind rushing inward, not outward in silence. After that, the valley changed. The fog stopped to bang the seasons. It crept up the hills and down the lanes, into barns and bedrooms. Time began to slip. Men who went hunting at dawn returned at dusk with frost in their beards, though only an hour had passed. A boy once ran into the fog chasing his dog. The next morning, he came home an old man, clutching the same leash, muttering, "She showed me the way." Old widow. Lark said the hollow had finally opened, that the seal had broken when the woman spoke the forgotten name aloud. "The mist isn't weather," she whispered. "It's memory." And memory doesn't like to be disturbed. The villagers tried to mark the boundaries, ropes, Candles, salt lines, but the hollow ignored them. The fog rolled where it pleased. At night, it reached all the way to the chapel, where the names on the stone shimmered like wet ink. Some names began to fade. Others, long gone, reappeared. And sometimes, if you stood by the ridge and listened closely, you could hear voices whispering from below, calling for help. Sometimes they called your name. Now they say the hollow has no bottom, that it swallows not just people, but time itself. If you wander too far, you might find the village as it was 100 years ago, or 100 years hence. Either way, you won't make it back. So when the fog comes crawling up the road, don't run. Don't shout. Don't even breathe too loud. Just close your eyes and pray it doesn't remember you. Because Black Hollow isn't a place anymore, it's a door. And it's open. Chapter 7 echoes in the attic. Every house in Dunlow creaks, but not all of them listen back. The Warrens bought the old Calder Manor in spring, when the fog was thin and the valley almost kind. They weren't locals. They came from the city with bright plans. To turn the manor into a bed and breakfast. To give the forgotten town a second life. They didn't know the house already had one. From the first night, the place sighed like a sleeping thing. The floors shifted even when no one walked them. The air upstairs smelled faintly of dust and lilacs, though no flowers grew within miles. Eleanor Warren told her husband she felt watched. By what? He asked. By everything, she said. He laughed, but 2 days later he stopped. The laughter came back to him, faint and delayed, from somewhere above the ceiling. The house had an attic, though the door at the end of the hall was nailed shut. The realtor said it was unsafe, that the floorboards had given way years ago. But each night they heard it, a soft dragging sound overhead, followed by 3 slow knocks. Eleanor asked the locals about it at the tavern. The barkeep went pale. That's not the wind, he said. That's memory. They found the nails on the attic door already rusted through. Curiosity, like rot, spreads quietly. Her husband pried them loose one evening. The door creaked open an inch, then stopped as if caught by a hand on the other side. The air that spilled out smelled like candle smoke and wet earth. They waited for daylight before going up. The attic was smaller than it looked from below. The ceiling low, beams bent like ribs. Dust floated thick as snow. In one corner stood a child's rocking chair. In another, a tall mirror draped in cloth. Eleanor lifted the sheet. The mirror was cracked down the middle, but it reflected her clearly, almost too clearly. Her face looked pale, the corners of her mouth tight with something she couldn't name. Then she blinked. Her reflection didn't. That night, she dreamed she was standing in the attic again. A woman whispered her name from behind the mirror, softly, almost kindly. "Let me see," the voice said. When Eleanor touched the glass, it rippled under her fingers, warm and slick as skin. She woke with dust on her hands. The next morning, her husband found her in the attic, staring into the mirror. She didn't turn when he called her name. Her eyes in the glass were moving, but her body wasn't. He dragged her downstairs and locked the attic door again. But the whispering followed. At first, it came from the vents, then the walls, then from inside the clock, marking the hours with sighs instead of chimes. Weeks passed. The fog grew thicker. One night, the husband went to check the attic again. The nails had fallen out, and the door hung open. He climbed the stairs, calling her name. No answer? Inside, the mirror stood uncovered. Only his face stared back, older, hollow-eyed, mouth slightly open. Then, behind him in the reflection, something moved, a woman, smiling faintly. He turned, no one. When he looked back, his reflection was gone. The next morning, neighbors found the house empty. No sign of the Warrens, no luggage, no footprints in the dust. But from the attic window, a pale shape moved just once before fading into shadow. Now the manor stands silent again. Visitors say they hear footsteps above them, 2 sets at first, then 1. Sometimes the mirror shows people who aren't there. Sometimes it hums. If you ever stay in Dunlow, you'll hear the same advice whispered at the tavern. Knock 3 times before you open any door. And never look in mirrors after midnight, Because the house remembers everyone who looks too long. And once it remembers you, it keeps you. Chapter 8. Never say her name. At the highest point in Dunlow, above the drowned fields and the whispering trees, stands a chapel no one prays in anymore. Its bell is cracked, its doors swollen shut with damp. When the wind blows through the steeple, it doesn't ring, it moans. The villagers call it St. Hollow's Rest, though the saint's name has long been forgotten. Some say the church was built to contain something. Others say it was built to apologize. Either way, no one goes there now, not since the fog climbed the hill. Father Gideon Marr wasn't a native son of Dunlow. He came from the city carrying a thick coat and a thin faith. He'd heard the stories, the shadow woman, the lantern man, the cursed tree, and thought them colorful fables for simple folk. He believed faith was stronger than fear. He'd learn otherwise. His first Sunday sermon drew only 4 villagers. The rest stayed home, windows barred. When he asked why, the oldest woman in the pews, Widow Lark, said softly, "Because she listens when we gather." "She?" he asked. The woman crossed herself. "The one we don't name." That night, Gideon searched the chapel's archives. The ledgers were patchwork, entries scratched out or burned. Whole pages had been torn away. But between the gaps, he found fragments, a trial record, a birth registry, a single surviving confession. Each fragment held the same name, written, then hastily blacked over. E.V. The ink had bled through the paper, like blood through linen. He brushed the edge of the page, and the lamp beside him flickered. A whisper slipped through the rafters. "Don't say it." The next morning, he asked the townsfolk who the woman had been. They turned away. One man muttered, "She was buried wrong." Another said, "She was erased." Gideon began to suspect the stories. The ghostly woman, the dolls, the lantern man weren't separate curses at all. They were pieces of one. He wanted to prove it. He wanted to bring light. So, on the last Sunday of October, he stood before the empty pews, opened his Bible, and read the forgotten name aloud. The bell rang. No one had touched it. Dust fell from the rafters like ash. The fog pressed against the stained glass from outside, silver white, pulsing with each toll. The ground trembled. The crucifix behind him cracked down the center. And from the far end of the chapel came a woman's voice, faint at first, then stronger. "You remembered me." The fog seeped through the cracks like breath. Figures began to form in it, pale silhouettes, their faces half missing, their bodies made of smoke and sorrow. He recognized them: the smith, the preacher, the traveling bard, the farmer, the widow, all the names carved on the chapel stone. They turned their hollow eyes toward him and spoke in one voice. "You gave her shape again." The door burst open. The wind rushed in, carrying the scent of the river, and with it, her. She wasn't a ghost, not anymore. She was the fog, the soil, the memory of everyone who'd ever spoken of her. Her face shifted like smoke, showing every lost soul for a heartbeat before fading to the next. When she smiled, the candles died. "You erased me," she said, her voice echoing from 1,000 mouths. "Now you'll remember." They found the chapel empty the next morning. The Bible lay open on the altar, pages blank. The bell rope had fused to the ceiling. And across the floor, written in frost, was a single phrase: "She has no grave." After that, the valley changed for good. The names on the chapel stone vanished. The river rose, swallowing the lower fields. And on cold nights, when the fog rolls thick and heavy, people still hear the bell toll 3 times, soft, deliberate like a heartbeat in the mist. Now no one in Dunlow says her name. They call her the Shadow Woman, the Weeping Willow, the Fog Bride, the Lady of Black Hollow, anything but what she was, because names have power, and hers remembers who took it. So when the fog drifts low and the wind grows still, don't whisper the stories aloud. Don't hum the songs. Don't try to remember her name, because she already remembers you. The last whisper, if you've watched this far, you've heard them, the voices that don't stay buried. They say that each retelling keeps the valley alive, that even now Dunlow sleeps somewhere in the folds of the mist, waiting to be remembered. Maybe you think these are just stories. Maybe you've watched this with the lights on, smiling at the superstitions of old places. But listen, the fog outside your window tonight, how it seems thicker than usual, how it dulls the world's edges, how you thought you heard someone say your name just then. That's how it starts. They say she never truly died, only became the breath between one tale and the next. Every word, every whisper is part of her. Every reader is a door. So close the page, but don't speak aloud. Don't hum the songs. And for the love of whatever light still guards you, never say her name.